In 2021, Europe found itself facing an unexpected crisis. Not a military invasion, not a financial collapse, but something far more insidious.
Migrants turned into weapons in a political battle. Tonight there's desperation near the border of Belarus. Migrants, many of them from the Middle East and Africa, armed with shovels and wire cutters, are trying to break through the barbed wire barrier and enter neighboring Poland.
Thousands of migrants, many from the Middle East and Africa, appeared at the borders of Poland, Lithuania and Latvia. They were not fleeing war zones on their own. They had been flown in, driven to the border and abandoned there, not by accident, but by design. This was a manufactured crisis engineered by the Belarusian regime of Alexander Lukashenko and backed by the Kremlin. It was a new kind of hybrid warfare using human desperation as a weapon to destabilize Europe. Sounds like a comically evil trope from a dystopian novel? Well, let's take a look at how it unfolded in our reality. In August of 2020, Belarus erupted in protests. After rigging yet another sham election, Alexander Lukashenko faced the largest uprising of his rule.
In Belarus, huge crowds of protesters have been demonstrating against President Alexander Lukashenko and the election that they say he rigged.
Hundreds of thousands of Belarusians took to the streets, demanding democracy and an end to his brutal reign.
Our aim is to show the government that we are not their slaves.
For weeks, cities like Minsk and Grodno were filled with chants of "Long live Belarus" until the crackdown came.
Minsk, Belarus, a Friday morning in September. In Europe's last dictatorship, this is rapidly becoming the new normal. Journalists have been arrested, stripped of their accreditations.
Sometimes there's no time for laws, and tough measures must be taken to stop all the trash from rising up.
Opposition activists and journalists are being rounded up and jailed in what people say is the most brutal crackdown that the country has ever known.
The regime responded with mass arrests, torture and state-sponsored terror. Thousands fled the country seeking refuge in neighboring Lithuania, Latvia and Poland. The European Union responded with sanctions, cutting off Lukashenko's access to Western financial markets.
Broad economic sanctions coming from the EU. The EU has said before that it wants to hit the Lukashenko regime in the wallet and that it wants to impose sanctions that will hurt.
And then Lukashenko made a decision. If the West wanted a humanitarian crisis, he would give them one. If the EU wanted to support the Belarusian opposition, he would flood Europe's border with migrants. This was a revenge plan, and Lukashenko had powerful autocrat friends willing to help. In the summer of 2021, something strange started happening in the Middle East. State-run Belarusian travel agencies, which had never been known for their tourism business, suddenly began offering special trips to Minsk. Thousands of people from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan and other conflict-ridden countries were told they had a safe and easy route into the European Union. The message spread through social media, word of mouth and even local ads. Flyers promised visas upon arrival, tourist packages that included flights and hotels, and transport to the EU border. Belarusian consulates, especially in Iraq and Lebanon, started issuing visas at an unprecedented rate. Airlines, some linked directly to the Belarusian government, began running special flights packed with migrants.
A growing number of African and Middle Eastern migrants are entering EU member Lithuania illegally from neighboring Belarus.
In just a few months, the number of flights from Baghdad to Minsk increased dramatically. By autumn, thousands of people had arrived in Belarus. What they didn't know was that they were walking into a trap. As soon as the migrants landed in Minsk, they were greeted not by tourist guides but by Belarusian security forces. Instead of being taken to hotels, they were herded into buses and driven straight to the borders of Lithuania, Latvia and Poland. Many were handed wire cutters and told exactly where to cross.
The Belarusian guards will help you to cross the border. So if you say to them, yes, I want to go to Poland.
Yes, they're going to take you there. And they give you some, food and power bank. Also, even they give you cutters.
At first, it seemed like disorganized chaos, but soon a clear pattern emerged. This was a state-sponsored operation coordinated from the top. Belarusian border guards did not just allow migrants to approach EU fences, they actively pushed them forward. In some cases, they physically forced them across using batons and intimidation. When migrants tried to turn back, they were beaten and threatened.
Take this family, literally stuck between Belarusian forces in balaclavas, pushing them one way, and Polish soldiers on the other side of the fence, trying to stop them.
Belarusian authorities confiscated their phones, leaving them unable to call for help or navigate. They were trapped in the dense forests and swamps that make up the borderlands, with no food, no shelter, and temperatures dropping to deadly levels. As thousands gathered at the border, tensions escalated. Poland and Lithuania responded by deploying troops and border guards, reinforcing the fences and implementing emergency measures. In November of 2021, the standoff reached a boiling point when a massive group of migrants, guided by Belarusian security forces, attempted to storm the Polish border near Kusnica. Videos showed Belarusian officers cutting fences, handing out tear gas, and shining laser pointers at Polish soldiers to blind them. The Polish border guards held the line using water cannons and riot gear to push back the waves of migrants being driven forward. It was a humanitarian tragedy, but also a security threat of a new kind. At first, Lukashenko tried to present this as a natural migration crisis, but no one was buying it. The evidence pointed to a clear conclusion. This was a hybrid attack, a new form of warfare where human suffering was turned into a political weapon.
It's clear that the Belarusian authorities are using human beings as a tool for political purposes.
And Belarus wasn't acting alone. From the very beginning, Russia was involved. Russian state media ran a coordinated propaganda campaign blaming the EU for the crisis. Kremlin officials echoed Lukashenko's talking points, accusing Europe of hypocrisy on migration.
Я думаю, что и слезоточивый газ, и водометы, и выстрелы поверх голов мигрантов в сторону государства Беларуси. Это все отражает, я считаю, стремление скрыть свои действия.
But beyond words, there were actions. Flights carrying migrants to Minsk were often operated by Russian-linked airlines. Some reports indicated that Russian intelligence had helped coordinate logistics. And when tensions at the border reached their peak, Russia escalated the pressure in other ways, sending nuclear-capable bombers to patrol Belarusian airspace and conducting massive military drills near the region.
It seems that our Western neighbors are ready to start a conflict, said Belarus's Minister of National Defense after staging military drills with Russia today.
For Putin, this crisis served multiple purposes. First, it helped Lukashenko, a loyal ally who had become more dependent on Moscow than ever before. Second, it distracted Europe from Ukraine, where Russia was already laying the groundwork for its next major escalation. And third, it tested NATO's response. How far would Europe go to defend itself? Within weeks, emergency measures were put in place. Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia fortified their borders with razor wire and military reinforcements.
Countless tons of concrete, barbed wire, and metal bars line the Polish-Belarusian border. This is Europe's new Iron Curtain. Don't let the lack of combat fool you here. A hybrid war is being waged where instead of missiles, migrants are being sent across the border.
The EU expanded sanctions against Belarus, targeting airlines and officials involved in trafficking migrants.
The European Union is expected to extend sanctions on Belarus over its actions at its borders.
A major diplomatic push was also launched.
This is the attempt of an authoritarian regime to try to destabilize its democratic neighbors.
The EU worked with Iraq, Lebanon, and other countries to stop flights to Belarus. Iraq agreed to suspend direct flights, and repatriation flights were arranged for stranded migrants. In a matter of weeks, the flow of new arrivals slowed down, though many were still stuck in dire conditions at the border. Autocrats remained extremely proud of their new hybrid warfare. It was a prelude to something much worse. Just months later, in February of 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, using Belarus as a staging ground. The hybrid tactics used in the border crisis were amplified on a massive scale in the war.
As Russia's invasion of Ukraine intensifies, Europe is bracing for what the United Nations is calling the fastest and largest displacement of people there since World War II.
Roughly 10 million people are either displaced inside Ukraine or have fled to other countries in search of safety.
Millions of Ukrainians could be on the move to escape the fighting, heading for the border with neighbouring countries.
The lesson from 2021 is simple. Europe can no longer afford to be reactive. It must anticipate threats, strengthen its defenses, and take authoritarian regimes at their word when they threaten destabilization. The Belarus-EU border crisis faded from the headlines, but its message is clear. In the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, complacency is not an option.